Alright, so let me tell you about the time my neighbor decided my driveway was public parking, and how that little habit ended up costing his family a small fortune. And the funny thing is, this whole mess started because I tried to be polite. Back in 2019, I bought this little corner house outside Raleigh, North Carolina. Nothing fancy, just a quiet working-class neighborhood, narrow street, old trees, the kind of place where everyone waves but nobody actually knows your last name. Now the street had one annoying problem: parking. Most of the houses had tiny single-car driveways, and the road itself was barely wide enough for two cars to pass each other without doing that awkward slow crawl. But my house, I got lucky. The previous owner had poured a double-wide driveway, probably sometime in the early 2000s. It could fit 2 trucks easy, 3 if you squeezed. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, until the neighbors moved in. About 6 months later, a family bought the house right next door. I'll call them the Crawfords. Dad, Dale Crawford. Loud guy, construction contractor type. Mom, Melissa. Nice enough when she first moved in. And their teenage son, Tyler, who had just gotten his driver's license and walked around like he'd been handed the keys to the kingdom. And here's where the math started getting interesting. 3 vehicles, 1 tiny driveway, 1 narrow street, and right next door, my big empty driveway. The first time I noticed their SUV creeping over the line, I honestly thought it was an accident. It was halfway across the edge of my driveway, not blocking it completely, just enough to make pulling out awkward. So I walked over and knocked on their door. Melissa opened it, still holding a dish towel. "Oh shoot, sorry about that," she said. "Tyler must have parked it there. We'll move it." And they did. No drama. No attitude. So I figured, okay, honest mistake. 2 weeks later it happened again. This time it was Dale's pickup truck. Same exact thing, just barely hanging over the edge of my driveway. Again I knocked. Again they apologized. Truck moved. Still no big deal. Then came the third time. Only this time nobody answered the door. So I left a little note. Just something simple. "Hey neighbor, could you try not to block the driveway? Makes it tough getting out. Thanks." Totally friendly. Midwestern level polite. And for about 3 days, it worked. Then the pattern started. At first it was maybe once a week. Then twice. Then suddenly, it was happening almost every day. Sometimes their SUV would creep 2 feet into the driveway line. Sometimes Tyler's old pickup would park so crooked the back bumper sat right across the entrance. One morning I came outside for work, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, and there it was. Tyler's truck, parked completely across my driveway entrance. Not partially, completely. I stood there for a second, just staring at it. You ever have one of those moments where your brain kind of freezes because you're trying to understand how someone could possibly think something is okay? Yeah, that moment. So I knocked on their door again. Nothing. Knocked harder. Still nothing. I called the number Melissa had given me when they moved in. Straight to voicemail. I ended up standing there in my work clothes for 10 minutes waiting until Tyler finally stumbled outside, half asleep, hoodie on backwards. "Oh my bad, dude," he said, scratching his head like he'd just woken up from a nap. Then he slowly moved the truck. That morning, I was 20 minutes late to work. And that's when something in my head started shifting. Because see, mistakes happen. But patterns? Patterns mean somebody stopped caring. Over the next 2 months, it kept getting worse. Some days they'd block just a corner. Some days half the driveway. One day I had to do what felt like a 12-point turn just to squeeze my car out onto the street without scraping the truck parked across the edge. So I tried texting. No reply. Tried knocking again. No answer. Left another note. Still nothing. And here's the part that started really getting under my skin. They were home. I could see the lights on. Hear the TV through the window. They just didn't feel like dealing with it. At that point, the message was pretty clear. My driveway had become their overflow parking lot. And apparently I was expected to just deal with it. Then one morning the situation hit a new level. I was already running late. Big meeting that day. I walk outside, hit the remote on my car. And Tyler's truck is parked fully sideways across the driveway entrance again. No space. Zero. Like someone had dropped a wall in front of my car. I walked over and pounded on their door. Hard this time. Nothing. Called again. Voicemail. I stood there in the driveway, looking at that truck blocking my exit, and that's when I realized something. I had spent 3 months asking nicely for permission to use my own driveway, and that's the moment I stopped asking. Instead, I went inside, grabbed my phone, and started looking something up. City parking ordinances, towing regulations, blocking private driveways. Because if they wanted to play games with convenience, I was about to introduce them to consequences. And trust me, the next time they parked there, I didn't knock on their door. I made a phone call, and about 20 minutes later, a tow truck showed up at the end of the street. Now, before I tell you what happened when that tow truck showed up, let's pause for a second, because this is where a lot of people misunderstand how situations like this actually work. See, from the outside it looks petty. Like, really? You called a tow truck on your neighbor? But from a legal perspective, blocking someone's driveway isn't just annoying, it's usually a direct violation of municipal parking law in most American cities. And according to standard procedure, once a vehicle is obstructing a private driveway, even partially, the property owner has the right to request immediate towing. No warning required. No courtesy knock. The driveway owner doesn't have to negotiate access to their own property. That's the law in a lot of places, including where I live. But the legal side isn't even the interesting part. The psychology is. Because this is a psychological trap people fall into all the time with neighbors. It starts with small boundary testing. Just a few inches over the line, just once in a while, just convenient for today. And if nothing happens, that behavior slowly becomes the new normal. You stop being the homeowner and start being the path of least resistance. That's exactly what was happening here. The Crawfords had learned something over those first 3 months. Every time they blocked my driveway, the worst consequence was a polite conversation. And polite conversations are cheap. Tow trucks? Not so much. And the moment that tow truck turned onto our street, the rules of the game changed. So, the tow truck rolls onto the street. Big diesel engine, yellow lights spinning, that heavy metal clank of chains in the back. The kind of sound that immediately makes everyone on the block peek through their curtains. And I'm standing there in my driveway pretending to check my phone like this is the most normal Tuesday morning in the world. The driver steps out, looks at the truck blocking my driveway, then looks at me. Is this the vehicle? He asks. I nod. Yep, that's the one. He doesn't ask questions. Because according to standard procedure, they don't have to. He walks around the truck, snaps a few photos, hooks the wheel lift under the front axle, and within maybe 3 minutes, Tyler's truck is up in the air. Just like that. No drama. No yelling. Just the quiet, mechanical sound of consequences. And then the tow truck pulls away. Gone. By the time the Crawfords even noticed, that truck was already halfway across town sitting in an impound lot. Now here's the part where the story could have ended. Because a normal neighbor would have learned their lesson right there. But the Crawfords weren't normal neighbors. That evening around 7 p.m., I hear pounding on my front door. Not knocking. Pounding. I open it. And there's Dale Crawford standing on my porch looking like a pressure cooker ready to explode. You had my kid's truck towed? He says. Not a question. An accusation. I lean against the doorframe and shrug. Yeah, it was blocking my driveway. His face turns red immediately. You could have just asked us to move it. And that's the moment where something inside me just clicked. Because I had asked. Many times. So I said exactly that. I did ask. Multiple times. Texted. Left notes. Knocked on your door. Nobody cared. He scoffs like I just told a bad joke. Man, that's petty, he says. Petty. I remember laughing a little when he said that. Not because it was funny, but because it was such a perfect example of how some people see the world. To him, his convenience mattered more than my property. So I told him something very simple. I'm not negotiating access to my own driveway anymore. Then I closed the door. And for a couple days, things were quiet. Driveway stayed clear. No cars creeping over the line. No trucks blocking the entrance. I thought maybe, just maybe, the message had landed. 2 days later, I wake up for work, grab my coffee, open the front door, and there it is again, Dale's pickup truck, parked halfway across the driveway entrance like the previous tow never happened. I stood there staring at it for maybe 10 seconds. Not angry, just impressed. The confidence it takes to repeat the exact same mistake after losing a vehicle for 12 hours and paying a $300 towing fee, that's a special kind of stubborn. So I pulled out my phone, called the same tow company. Dispatcher answers. County Recovery. Hey, I said, same address as last time. There was a pause, then the guy chuckled. Ah yeah, we remember you. 20 minutes later, tow number 2. And this time the Crawfords noticed faster. Melissa came running outside halfway down the street, yelling while the tow truck was already lifting the front wheels. Wait. The driver just points toward me standing in my driveway. Property owner call. Nothing he can do. The truck disappeared again. Now here's where things started getting expensive. Because towing fees don't just stop at the hook. There's the tow charge, storage fees, after-hours pickup, administrative fees. Every time that truck went to the impound lot, it cost them over $300. And yet somehow, the lesson still didn't stick. By the end of that month, I had called 6 tow trucks. 6. At that point, you'd think they'd stop completely. Instead, they got clever. Or at least they thought they did. The next time Dale parked there, he left just 1 inch of space before the driveway line. Technically over the line, but barely. Like the world's dumbest game of parking chicken. That's when I realized something. This wasn't about parking anymore. This had become a competition. So I started documenting everything. Every single time a tire crossed that driveway line. Photos, timestamps, doorbell camera footage. I kept a little log on my phone. Date, time, vehicle, tow company reference number. Over the next 3 months, tow numbers 7 through 12 happened like clockwork. The dispatcher actually started recognizing my address. When I called, he'd say something like, "Driveway guy again?" Yep. Then came tow number 13. And this one was special because Tyler had borrowed the truck again. Apparently without telling his parents. Friday night party somewhere across town. The truck got towed around 9:30 p.m. But Tyler didn't come back looking for it until about 1 a.m. And when he walked outside and saw the truck missing, he thought it had been stolen. So he called the police. Yeah, the police. Officers show up, take the report, run the plates, and within about 5 minutes they tell him exactly where the truck is sitting, the impound lot downtown. I wasn't there for that conversation, but the next morning I heard the whole story from Dale. Because he showed up at my door again. Only this time he looked exhausted. Like a man who had spent half the night arguing with a tow yard employee through a security window. "This is getting out of hand," he said. And I nodded. Because he was right. It was getting out of hand. But I reminded him of something important. I'm not the one parking there. For about 2 weeks after that, the driveway stayed perfectly clear. Peace returned to the street. Then September rolled around. Football season. And if you've ever lived in a neighborhood with football fans, you already know what that means. Overflow parking. Friends coming over. Cars lining both sides of the street. And sure enough, one Saturday afternoon, someone parked across my driveway again. This time, it wasn't even the Crawfords' car. It was one of their guests. But guess who got to pay the towing fee? Tow number 14. Then 15. 16. 17. 18. By the time we hit 23 tows, the situation had become neighborhood legend. People on the block would literally text each other when a tow truck showed up. Kids riding bikes would stop to watch. One guy down the street started calling it the Crawford parking tax. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Around that time, I even installed reflective driveway markers and a small sign at the entrance. Bright white letters. Do not block driveway. Towing enforced. Crystal clear. Didn't matter. Tow number 24, 25, 26, and finally, number 27. That was the one that ended it. Not because the Crawfords suddenly had a moment of personal growth, but because their insurance company got involved. Apparently, when a vehicle gets impounded repeatedly within the same policy year, it raises red flags. Risk indicators, claims history, whatever algorithm insurance companies use to decide your liability, their premiums went up. A lot. And about 2 weeks after that, I heard construction noises next door. Concrete truck, jackhammers, work crew. When I looked outside, they were expanding their driveway, pouring a whole new slab of concrete so it could fit 3 cars comfortably. Cost them several $1,000s. But you know what? Since the day that new driveway finished curing, my driveway has stayed perfectly clear. Not once. Not even an inch. 8 months of total peace. Which just goes to show, sometimes the most effective teacher in the world is a tow truck. Now when I tell this story to people, the reaction is usually split right down the middle. Half the room laughs. The other half looks at me like I just confessed to committing some kind of suburban war crime. 27 tows? Dude, that's savage. And yeah, I get it. On paper it sounds brutal. But here's the thing people forget about neighbor conflicts. They rarely start big. They start small. A few inches over the line. A quick favor. A temporary inconvenience that slowly becomes permanent. And if you're the kind of person who tries to keep the peace, which most homeowners are, you end up doing something dangerous without realizing it. You start negotiating your own boundaries. You give a little space. then a little more. Then suddenly the thing that belonged to you doesn't really feel like yours anymore. Your driveway becomes shared. Your parking spot becomes flexible. Your property becomes no big deal. And this is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into. Because the more patient you are, the more the other person learns that patience has no consequences. In psychology, they call this boundary erosion. Every time someone pushes a line and nothing happens, the brain rewrites the rule. The new rule becomes, oh, I guess that's allowed. That's exactly what happened in my situation. For the first 3 months, I tried every polite solution possible. Conversations, notes, texts, friendly reminders. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Politeness only works when both people respect the boundary. When one person doesn't, politeness becomes permission. And that's where the legal side of this story actually matters. Because from a legal perspective, property rights are one of the clearest protections homeowners have. If someone blocks your driveway, they are interfering with access to your property. That's not just annoying. In most cities, it's a direct parking violation. And according to standard procedure, tow companies are legally allowed to remove vehicles obstructing a private driveway when the property owner requests it. No warning required. No negotiation required. No apology required. The law assumes something very simple. You shouldn't have to ask for permission to leave your own house. But here's the part that really matters. The lesson that took me way too long to understand. The lesson here is this. Boundaries only work when they're enforced early. If I had called the tow truck the second or third time they blocked the driveway, this entire story probably would have ended right there. 1 tow, maybe 2. Instead, I waited 3 months trying to be the good neighbor. And by that point, the Crawfords had already learned that nothing serious would happen. So when consequences finally showed up, it felt extreme. Not because it was unfair, but because it was delayed. And honestly, that's probably the real reason this whole situation spiraled the way it did. Not the tow trucks, not the parking, the delay, the silence, the assumption that eventually I would just give in. The funny part is, once they widened their own driveway, the problem vanished overnight. Turns out they had the ability to solve the problem the entire time. They just didn't feel any urgency until it started costing them money. Which brings me to the part I'm actually curious about. Because everyone has a different tolerance for this kind of thing. Some people would have called a tow truck the very first time. Some people would have never called one at all. Some people might have gone straight to the city or an HOA complaint. And some people probably would have escalated this into a full neighborhood feud. So I'm honestly wondering, if you were in my situation, same driveway, same neighbor, same 3 months of polite warnings, how many times would it have taken before you called the first tow truck? Once? 3 times? 10? Or would you have handled it completely differently? Drop your answer in the comments, because I have a feeling this is one of those situations where everyone thinks they'd react differently, until they're the one standing in their driveway at 7 a.m. staring at someone else's truck blocking the exit.